hopefully this won't keep happening. I had some issues earlier when I was doing one of these that my share screen kept getting kicked out. There's David. And I don't know why, but at some points it looked like it was some internet issue, but right now it doesn't look like I have an internet issue, so hopefully it won't happen. Okay. But we may at some point lose my screen share. Have you guys been doing Zoom a lot? I keep joking around and saying I'm the master of Zoom, but I'm not. So if I have any issues, I might have to lean on you guys.
Yeah, we only did Zoom University for like 6 months. So
for school, you guys were using Zoom?
Yeah, so we found out we were going online right at the end of spring break when we have two of our biggest hands-on classes. We were in neuro rehab.
Oh, you told me that.
Cardio palm. So they switched everything online, and then at the end of June, we started making up labs and practicals from the spring and summer. So from March to late June, we were all online, and then June to August, we did hands-on stuff.
Cheez-Its.
Yeah.
What are you eating there, man? You think I'm going to accept Cheez-Its on this talk? Come on, buddy. You're supposed to be a healthcare doctor.
Yeah, Sean, be professional.
Shame.
Also, I'm David. Thank you for hosting us. I appreciate it.
Oh, there you are, David. What's up, brother? What'd you say there? Sorry?
Oh, just saying thank you for hosting us. I appreciate it. It's cool.
Oh, it's really cool that you guys decided to join in here. You know, it's one of the things that I've wanted to do for a while. I've been doing a little bit more since the quarantine has happened, and trying to make a push to do more online educational stuff just in general. It's something that I've kind of always done in the past, but I got away from it in the last few years, and now I'm looking forward to trying to do some more things like this. I think now it's so much better. You know, I graduated PT school in 2006, right? So it was just so much different in terms of the ability to use technology. The cool part about it, which I don't know how much I'll get into today, but I did my residency in 2006 over my sports residency at the University of Cincinnati. And right at that time was like, I think, is it T3? Is that what the internet connection speed thing is? You guys might know better than I do. Yeah, so we went from basically having a phone modem, using cable modems for the internet, to moving to these high-speed internet systems. I think it was called T1 or T3, something like that. And basically, right at that same time, they were putting all of the journal articles for everything, for every journal that existed, into these university libraries. So I went from, in 1 year, you literally couldn't search and find an article, to all of a sudden you had access to literally every article that had ever been published, in that time. And I was going into this specialized training system at the time here. Is everybody here? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So Noah, what have you told these guys about me so far?
Just that you're super smart, and you're the reason why I can stand on physio balls.
Oh, that's a good thing, right?
No, I told him you're a sports PT. I did an internship with you, and you're just a very knowledgeable PT with a lot of cool experience, with a very unique twist on physical therapy and sports performance stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, the cool part is, again, coming back to 2006, I got to learn from the old school PTs, right? So it was a lot of a different just paradigm that they were coming from, when they didn't have this, no offense to you guys, but we're kind of entitled now with the doctorates and all of these things, where, the people from the 80s and 90s were fighting for survival, right? They weren't sure whether the profession was going to be able to continue or not. And if you talk to any of those PTs from back then, they were all full of piss and vinegar, especially the guys that were the big wigs in the profession. They were, every time you talk to them, they had this super, passionate thing, whatever it was that they were hooked into. But also at the same time, that's usually the way that it was. It was kind of this myopic approach where, the PT was a physician extender, and you had your orthopedic surgeon who was the shoulder guy. So you had the orthopedic based PT that was the shoulder PT. and I'll get into this in a few minutes, but, you know, the idea of the PT being this movement practitioner really didn't exist at that time. So it was really cool for me because I was a 2-sport athlete in college. I was a 2-time All-American in wrestling, and I played 4 years of baseball at a small Division II school, you know, back in Pennsylvania. And so I got a really cool firsthand experience with sports, you know, on my own athletic experience. Then I went to the University of Cincinnati after that and got to, you know, work as a PT in a Division I training room for 3 years, which was especially at that time, mostly you didn't see too many PTs working in a training room at all, let alone a Division I training room or anything like that. So it was a really unique experience, especially when you couple it with the fact that direct access was passed and all the laws that needed to be passed in Pennsylvania and Maryland, as well as the research studies were done in 2004. So I graduated in 2006 and moved into this position where I was working in the training room at the University of Cincinnati, and I was able to really self-express much more than you're going to see for your typical PT, because I was able to see injuries straight off of the field. Sometimes I was on the field when the injury would happen. I would actually get to take the athlete to get their MRI, take them to the surgery center, watch their surgery, and then rehab them the whole way back through the process. So it was that in and of itself created an unbelievably unique experience, especially with the mentorship that I was having at the time. So good call, Noah. Yeah. And I because I learned things longhand, I didn't, the FMS didn't exist, right? YouTube wasn't a thing. You couldn't go on Instagram and look up all of these random exercises that you see all the time that everybody throws out. Hey, here's your 5 exercises for this. And it's like, there's no way that a doctor should be thinking that way. Right. And that's one of the things I was really lucky that I got indoctrinated in on my residencies and my training programs was, well, if, things are going to switch to this doctorate of education, well, what does that mean? Right? What does that mean for us? We can't just continue to be the same as we were as a profession. Now it's cool because you guys are getting to kind of reap the benefits of all of the things that have happened back then, but there's a lot of things that get lost in translation. But I'm really looking forward to hearing some of your feedback from you guys too. I'm a little bit out of the loop as to what's being taught at the university level with the current situation, and I'm sure it's way better than it was when I was coming through. But I also know that it's still very much entry level, and you're brushing over a ton of concepts and topics and not really becoming an expert. That's a whole nother rabbit hole that we can get into. And any questions that towards the end or whatever, as we keep doing this, and I hope we can keep doing this week after week. You guys find this information interesting and want to keep talking about it. But anytime that you guys have any questions or anything, let me know. I'll keep asking if you have any questions. And if there's just anything that you guys are curious about, obviously, I have a lot of experience with a lot of different things, and you guys are, getting ready to enter a pretty important decision-making process in your lives. So whatever I can do to help, and it ultimately helped me too, because I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say about the current state of everything. So the Mission 2020 statement, or Vision 2020 statement, was transformed in and of itself. It used to be a lot different than what it is now, but now this APTA vision statement is transforming society by optimizing movement to improve the human experience, which is pretty cool, but it's a little bland compared to the way that it used to be. It used to be that we were going to be an autonomous doctoring profession with, direct access rights and all these different things that were in it. And they decreased some of the specificity along the lines, with that, and kind of blanket stated this thing about us becoming the experts at movement. Well, that movement started in around the year 2000 was when the Vision 2020 statement was created. And again, you come back to, I entered PT school in 2003. So this was a really big deal at the time, how things were shifting. And, just one of the things that I want to cover, these are just quotes that mean something to me. Whether they mean anything to you guys or not, that's for you guys to decide. But I think especially this next one, in the times that we're in right now, it's a pretty interesting scenario, especially with guys that are getting their doctorates and trying to be experts in the subject matter, right? And it's really hard right now to tell what the truth is, what is best practice really for anything. How are we supposed to live our lives, right? Even, in making decisions, things are getting cloudy. And it's one of the things that, and I can say that I'm really glad that I became a PT for just the simple process of decision making that we learned. And then really my residency program, changed the game on how to really understand how to consume information, which I think has gotten a lot better for you guys. With the residency track is a lot more in depth and detailed when it comes to that, a lot more specificity. Obviously, again, getting more unique in the subject matter and body of knowledge. So in this last quote here has been on my card since probably 2008. It's just something that I've embraced and embodied. I still work out a lot. I'm still in pretty good shape. And more than anything, I try to stay in a good, healthy mental condition, which has been an interesting thing to watch as this whole pandemic and quarantine thing has gone on. It makes it really tough. But, I believe that, people can improve no matter what. It's one of the things that, I kind of, has always been my mantra. You should treat people like they can improve, and especially when it comes down to having a sound mind and a sound body, right? It's a big deal to pursue that, especially when we see how unhappy people think about, they think that how unhappy they are about their life and how they, are kind of negative in the way that they think about the current state of things, right? But, I'll move on to the next slide. I mean, if you really look at everything and how things are going, and this is maybe my opinion, but things keep getting better and better. So, you guys should keep holding your heads up high through everything that's going on right now. Over time, things are just going to keep getting better. It's just the way that things have gone on. It's more likely, and the probabilities and likelihood of things to get better are way higher than they are to get worse. So, and at least that's, you'll find if we keep talking, I'm kind of the forever optimist. So I try to stay positive as much as possible. It's like, why take that other approach? It's not going to lead you anywhere that you want to go. You guys got any thoughts on any of those quotes? Oh, all right.
So I like the first one. The first one is very relevant. I think you're right, especially for today's times.
Now, why do you say that?
Just with the access to information and misinformation, everything starts to get lost, and you can't tell what's true and what isn't. So
yeah,
I think it's very.
And if you think about, right, scary environments, right, we don't really have a scary environment. This comes back to physiology and fight or flight responses and all of those things that we're designed to be able to utilize that most people aren't utilizing very well in this day and age. But the scariest environment is one where you don't know where the danger is, right? And it comes and sucker punches you when you're not ready for it. And that's kind of where we're at right now. So, and that's where I come back to, just the pursuit of higher level education right now is a noble act, because you're trying to get a better understanding and interpretation of what's reality in this world. So, you'll come to be grateful for that as you guys continue to move on. Especially when, you're probably already seeing this. It really segments you away from the rest of society on some level, which is the other neat part about our jobs. It's so personal. So we have to become these like outlier weirdos, but we also have to come back and be the most personable people, in the healthcare profession anyways, right? So, and relatable as well. It's a big part of the skill, at least on the orthopedic and sports side. Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, that's why I put it there. There's some real interesting things to think about, and why we should be, trying to have the best knowledge and skill set that we can.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, from kind of my point of view on that first statement, we've definitely heard a lot more about the movement system throughout our schooling. And I think that's a very interesting system to kind of introduce to the mix, aside from kind of the basic ones that we all kind of know about. And even having been introduced to like movement system diagnoses, I think we had in a neuro class, and though they're kind of very, I guess, umbrella diagnoses in a way, and in some ways they're specific as well. But I thought that was kind of an interesting way to go about it, because as a whole, I feel like as society, we don't really see the movement system as, I don't know what I'm trying to say here. It's hard to acknowledge the movement system when we can't see it necessarily anatomically, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So it's an interesting thing. Let me add to that, because it mostly is partially the way that you learn it, right? Because we have to break things down into its parts before we can put it back together in its complexity. So it's just a part of the educational process, right? So initially you have to learn the ABCs before you can form a sentence, before you can form a paragraph, et cetera, right? So the interesting part is, though, is we tend to find a lot of our bias and some of the fallacy in reconstructing that process. Now, again, this is why I was saying about learning it in the longhand old school way, because now you guys are left to kind of try to deconstruct all these commercialized packaged programs that are out there. You're getting so much exposure to them and not knowing really all the time where they came from. Now, the cool part is the literature's there for you guys to go find and dig into, which I encourage you to do that. You know, there's no reason why you guys can't be reading 3 or 4 articles a night at this point. You probably should be, right? If you really want to be a doctor in this profession, that's a thing that you want to do, whether it's through a structured curriculum or, it's just on your own, but continuing to further educate yourself. And then as you get into more of a, into your clinical, expertise, whatever practice setting that you guys are going to get into, and you start working with that, that's where that skill set's going to improve, where you're able to integrate all of these things back in, and you're able to see the movement. The interesting part about you saying that is, Alex, is that, and no offense, it's a biased thing that we have as doctors and scientists, assuming that people can't see the movement, right? Because we are so trained to see the microscopic, the small parts, that it makes it hard for us to take that away and then just be able to see the whole and also trying to integrate it in. And one of the reasons I say this primarily is because I go talk to coaches all the time. And one of the reasons I can relate to them is because I understand the movements that they understand. Right. So when I started talking about throwing mechanics and hitting mechanics to a baseball guy, they don't expect that I'm going to be able to understand it as well as they do. Maybe even I understand it better because I have all of this compartmentalization with the arthrokinematics and all of these things as well. Right. So that kind of, to me, is a next step for you guys, really, is to really start grasping the full movement spectrum. Now, one of the things that you're getting a little bit confused on, too, a lot of the times with this is considering a squat or a exercise a movement pattern, right? But they're exercises. So there's a difference between looking at what a functional movement is versus what a functional exercise is, right? They're really completely different things. So it's one of the reasons why I'm actually doing this, and I want to talk to you guys about this right now, and I'm making this effort on, to start doing this for whoever really wants to listen, is because I think that athleticism is at the key to understanding all of this. Because if you can understand athletic movements, it makes it even much easier to understand walking mechanics. Does that make sense? If I can understand sprinting and cutting and turning and all these different things that go on in athletics, the how do you want to say, the principles can't change, right? And that's the biggest thing. The principles of human movement can't change based upon somebody's status. So if they're injured or they're, have some type of disease process, or they have a deformity, or they're some elite athlete or some highly trained tactical, athlete of some type, or whatever you want to call it, the principles are still the same, right? So you can't change that. And, over time, again, if you guys, the cool part about it is we weren't exposed to this very much at all when I was in school. Right. So this was hardly being talked about. So at least you guys are getting this idea that, there's a bigger picture here to that. So you'll be able to continue to improve your practice along those lines. But again, that's why I'm here. I want to help with that, right? Because I think it's the most important thing. So without understanding the higher level movement stuff, I think it's really hard to understand the lower level stuff. It leaves you confused. Obviously, it's easy to go, oh, okay, hey, range of motion, measuring it, and still, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more. There's also some nuances in the functional movements that make you think differently about how you're looking at your static linear type of motions, just like range of motion or muscle length testing or whatever. So this article was obviously in the Pittsburgh the Tribune thing for the Pittsburgh sports area. I worked with Antonio Brown for a couple of years. No, you were never around when I was with him, right?
No, I was not. I believe that was like a year or so after you were with him. Okay,
cool. Yeah, so there's this thing, this is actually from Ryan Shazier, if you guys know who he is. He had that spinal cord injury a couple years ago and is still hasn't returned to play, but he's talking about this. And the cool part about this for me, this is what I worked on with AB. As great of an athlete as he was when I started working with him, we were working on basically turning his cuts into the 1-inch punch. And so the reason why I'm emphasizing that right now is because it's significant, and I want to put it into your head about, you know, what the best movements are, right? How are you going to move at the elite of the elite level, right? What do they do differently than the average person, right? And basically, if you look at what he says here, you know, guys like AB, Emmanuel Sanders, T.Y. Hilton, they don't elaborate on their breakdowns. They don't sell it. They're economical. There's no exaggeration. They just plant one foot, and it's like they teleport steps away from you, right? And what do we learn in PT school about that? Right. So if we're going to work with an NFL wide receiver or a high school wide receiver for that means, do we really understand what the competitive advantage in that kid's sport is, or that athlete's sport? And then the question also becomes is, how does something like that relate to, hey, I'm just going to sidestep, you know, and change directions when I'm in my office or whatever I'm doing, right? Or just walking up and down stairs. So I just wanted to put that out there because I thought it was so cool. I never got any credit for this with him. My name never got put in any of these articles. And I know that I made a big change with working on this with him. And it's also kind of the epitomization of what I believe in, that people need to understand a little bit better about this. And we'll eventually get into that. So did you guys read any of these questions here? Right. These are questions that really fueled me early on, you know, as an athlete. As I'm trying to learn the basics through PT, and I was sports and exercise science as well in undergrad, but there were just some things that, you know, really didn't always add up, you know, and I think I'm going to hone on this. It's like, well, why do these huge, tall athletes, how can they move so gracefully like a little athlete, right? Like a smaller guy. And when you look at your average person in the population, it just doesn't make sense. Right? If you go out in the street or go to the mall and you look at some guy that's 6'7" that's walking, you know, down the stairs or doing anything, they look like a big, awkward, lurching type of person typically, right? But then you see these guys that are, you know, on Sundays or whatever sport that you want to talk about, you know, they look like ballerinas when they move. And it's like, wow, what is the difference that separates those two people, right? And obviously you guys can, you know, add to that, but you know, there's a huge difference between those two sets of people. Even if you put all their anthropomorphics, you know, and keep them equal, the quality of their movement is hugely different, right? And so then the question becomes is why? Then you come back to getting in shape and out of shape, recovering from an injury, right? You know, ultimately this first bullet point, you know, why are the best athletes able to do less than everyone else and still be better? Right. And it's just the truth. They're just another step or a notch ahead of everybody else when it comes to athleticism and performance. Right. So, excuse me. And I'm sure you guys have seen this, right? I'm just going to touch on this final bullet point. Why do dancers and gymnasts and martial artists and wrestlers seem to excel in every other sport that they do? I know I've seen this professionally, especially in the female athletes. You know, most of the female athletes that I've had that were high level, you know, especially the high school kids, not so much like Rhonda and these other people that I worked with, you know, they had an extensive, you know, some type of athletic career with multi-sport stuff, you know, when they were younger as well. But a lot of the high school girls that I see have typically a gymnastics background. And the story is they hit puberty, they grew 6 inches, and now they're a volleyball player or a basketball player or something along those lines. But they had that base of athleticism that was being built in when they were a younger, you know, a youth athlete or a younger kid. All right. You guys got any questions about that? I mean, it's pretty straightforward relatively. Cool. All right. So I'm going to jump through these bullet points here, right? So why did I create the FyzioGym? And ultimately, what do you guys think about the FyzioGym? I'm curious about that. I still go back and forth on, you know, on whether I want to change it or not. I'd love to hear what your opinions are.
I've always liked it since I first started working for you and you brought it up.
I like it too.
I'm a fan.
Nice.
Yeah, I thought.
Nice. Good. It's one of those things as an entrepreneur in business and stuff, you're always second guessing things like that. But, you know, to me, it was the thing that summed up the solutions to the problems I wasn't seeing being provided out there, right? So a little background that Noah probably wouldn't be able to give you. I worked at the University of Cincinnati. I did my residency there. I worked for 2 years. I ended up going into a private practice in Erie, Pennsylvania. And my first 3 years, I never saw a walker, right? I never saw people that had, typical orthopedic problems. It was an amazing job, right? Literally my last 2 years at Cincinnati, my office, like I am here right now, walked out to the football field to the stadium at the University of Cincinnati. So, primarily what I was working with was all athletic based individuals, whether it was people that were doing triathlons, and, we worked with the university professors and the board of directors and everybody. So, but most of the ones that we saw were these, fitness related people. And it was at that time, this is 2006, 2007, there wasn't really an answer in society for that type of person, even including myself. It's like, where would I go to physical therapy? Well, there wasn't really a practitioner that had an athletic background and also had, a really in-depth understanding of orthopedic and sports physical therapy. It was just really, really few and far between. So then to imagine trying to find a place that actually catered towards that population, it just didn't really exist. I mean, here and there, but it was very, very, very much few and far between. But coming back to this next bullet point, right? I realized at that time that there's all these people out there that really need us, right? I'm from a small town in north of Pittsburgh, and I think about that all the time. Like, wow, what if I could have had somebody like me in my life when I was in high school that could have shown me the direction to go, and there just wasn't anybody there. When you got an injury back then, they told you to put your foot in the ice bucket or whatever, tape it up, and get moving on. You didn't even think about going to physical therapy, right? So at the same time, you fast forward, and I'm in Cincinnati, and we have every bell and whistle. I have an MRI center right around the corner from my office that I could literally take an athlete and walk 5 minutes around the corner of my building to take that athlete into the MRI center, boom, bring them right back out. We had dietitians and underwater treadmills in the pools and every bell and whistle that you could want. The Biodex balance machines, the Biodex isokinetic testing devices, we had everything. And it was like, well, how do we take that and bring that back out into the real world for everybody else? And at that time, I had a lot of questions about it. And it took me, around 10 years actually to come up with this idea of calling it the FyzioGym. It was hard to find, the verbiage to go along with it, right? And again, this comes back to people need us, and who are they? There's so many more fitness freaks and athletic freaks out there. This idea of CrossFit and athletes training year round like they are right now, it didn't exist 15 years ago. Right, you were a huge outlier if you were somebody that falls into this category. And now these people have almost kind of rewritten the orthopedic and sports world, where that's why I come back to being careful with what you think about and your depth of knowledge on movement. If all you're paying attention to weightlifting exercise and calling those movements, you're forgetting about this huge spectrum of athletic movements that's out there that we should be paying attention to. And I'll probably beat that dead horse a little bit because it's one of the things I think that you got to appreciate and take away from it. Again, we're seeing PTs that are trained in neuromuscular, right? That's what the NM means from there. We're trained in neuromuscular, right? Would everybody agree with that? Like when we look at human movement and the human condition, we're primarily trained in this neuromuscular idea. Would you guys agree? Right? So the thing I've seen over the years, though, that I found very interesting is that if you talk to a physical therapist about a fitness program, they immediately abandon their neuromuscular philosophy and they go right into the structure and the physiological VO2 max and cardiorespiratory endurance and structural hypertrophy type of thinking, right? Which, almost completely abandons the neuromuscular principles that we learn. So the question is, well, why is that? Well, what I was doing in my my residency program was trying to become a specialist in returning athletes to sports. So I was very confused about this at the time. It was like, well, we do all of this neuromuscular training and then this huge neuromuscular emphasis throughout this rehab process for 9 months. And then all of a sudden we're like, okay, hey, see you, go back to your strength and conditioning program. Don't worry about this neuromuscular stuff anymore, right? So on one end, typically, when you talk to most physical therapists, they don't really have a fitness system that they use unless you're into Pilates and yoga, which has ultimately become, a bigger mainstream thing, especially for the female therapists out there. At least the social media is skewing my mind to believe that that's what's happening. Or you don't have a program that an athlete can get, transitioned into after they have an injury, or any human can get transitioned into that represents a neuromuscular basis as its foundational philosophy, right? It just doesn't exist. Next bullet point, one of the things that I've found over the years that, typically with us in the way that insurance reimburses for us, that we don't do the greatest job of coaching people, right? One of our biggest issues that we have in our profession is compliance, right? And it's a major concern most of the time for most of us. And a lot of times we blame it on the clients that we have and the patients that we have. And what I've seen over the years, and the reason I bring this up is because typically, traditionally, I find that the trainers out there, whether they're coaches, in a sports specific training situation, or they're actually a sports performance trainer, they do, or just a personal trainer in general, they do a better job than us at typically coaching our clients. Again, there's some definite significant limitations on our ability to do that as well, especially when you're dealing with a client that got referred from a physician. They believe that they're coming to see you for the referral that they got from that physician, not for you to basically exercise your expertise and help them to self-actualize beyond that problem that physician actually referred them to you for. So another thing that, and I'm trying to kind of put things in perspective of where I'm coming from. I know this is a little bit all over the place, but these are some of the things that I wanted to touch on to kind of set the stage for this. But do you guys remember what androstenedione was? Anybody know what that is? No, the baseball guy. I'll give you a hint.
What wasn't that what Mark McGuire was on and
yeah,
ended up being a steroid?
Yeah, him and Sammy Sosa, right? So, but yeah, everybody was on it at the time because it was being sold at GNC, and it was something that I took, when I was in college. The reason I said 2004 is because I basically don't remember it being sold past then. I think that I looked it up too, that maybe that was when it went off the shelf in 2004. So that could be, don't quote me on that date, but it's right around that time. But that's not that long ago when you think about that a steroid was being sold at GNC, right? So you fast forward things, 15, 16 years, and we're in a completely different world, right? You can't even imagine that happening right now, right? Everything is so much more regulated. Everything's so much tighter. Now people are finding other ways to cheat. There's no doubt about that. But, the point is that the culture that all of these things that you guys are learning about right now were created in a completely different time, especially in a time that PEDs were a big component of what people were doing for fitness, right? It was a huge issue. And bodybuilding was the main driver, behind strength training. People weren't doing Olympic lifting and powerlifting and the CrossFit style of lifting. You were primarily a bodybuilder if you were entering in the weight room, and it's just the way that it was. And everything was so skewed in that direction, you really had to learn and understand the bodybuilding style of training before you could branch out and move into anything else. And again, coming back to it, there wasn't a physical therapy based program out there that was fitness oriented. It just didn't exist, right? So I come back to this bullet point up here. What is pain, right? And I always love to hear from you guys in this new pain science, aspect of patient care and whatnot, which I think gets way too much attention in my opinion. And we can discuss that as well. But, pain becomes a priority. And that's one of the main things that pain is, right? It's a stimulus for your sensory experience that people are experiencing, right? And it ultimately draws your attention away from what's going on, around you internally and makes you focus on that pain. And it's obviously you guys understand that, but I always like to kind of bring clarity into that because I'm going to continue to talk about the neuromuscular system, right? So when we have pain, we're going to see a disruption in that neuromuscular pathway. And I know you guys know this stuff, and some of this stuff is geared to, to bridge the gap between the fitness trainer and the physical therapist as well. So something to think about all this. The PT assessment changed my life. Why, right? I was an exercise science student. I was a 2-time All-American in wrestling. I played baseball for 4 years and pitched for my college baseball team. And I get laid down on the table in my first, musculoskeletal class, and we start doing the assessments. And these 2 young girls, I'll never forget it. Oh, Sean got kicked out. And they're going, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And I'm like, whoa, how is this possible? I've been training like a madman the last, 10 years of my life. And I was the type of person that would have, if somebody would have exposed me to the information and saying, hey, your hamstrings are tight, or you have this issue going on with your foot or whatever, I would have been a person that would have actually done something about it, right? And at least tried to do something for performance enhancing to make it better. And I wasn't presented with this information until after I was done competing. So I was pretty pissed actually early on in my first year of college, because I kept being presented with this information that was giving me a ton of cognitive dissonance, because I thought that I was in, some of the best shape that a human can be in at that time. And I couldn't have been more wrong, right? And it was just, I had no exposure to this physical therapy paradigm at that time, right? Athletic has to be at least goal number 2, right? You guys can put whatever other goal you want to put first, get them out of pain, right? More smiles to breath ratio, make them happier. But being more athletic should be, yeah, you like that, David? That's what I got some sound bites that you will be.
That was a good
across.
one. Keep that in the script. That was good.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's true, and I'll jump to this. Actually, I'll wait, because I'm going to talk about it in a second about what I think we really do as a profession. But being athletic at least has to be goal number 2. So I want you guys to think about that. It's like, well, why wouldn't you want somebody to be more athletic? It doesn't really make sense as we go. The maxima of maxima. Have you guys ever heard of that term? Yeah, probably not. It's a really high level strength and conditioning term. And basically, it's the idea of when the mother picks the car up off of her baby. You hear that story when they freak out, right? And the adrenaline goes crazy. But it's also your ability to basically have your production of your absolute maximum strength would be an example, or your absolute maximal performance in any physical performance test would be considered the maxima of maxima. There's a really good book, if you guys haven't ever came across it, called Super Training. Have you ever heard of that book? So it was done by basically the head of the Russian Sports Science Committee and the South African Sports Science Committees. These two guys came together and wrote a book about every research study that they had done for 40 years. And it's basically the kind of the gold standard in strength and conditioning, which I find it to be pretty interesting that as doctors and physical therapists, being in school, as long as you guys have, you've never heard of that. Right. So we're going to talk about movement and all of these things, but we're never going to get right to the point. That's why I wanted to do this, so I could help expose you guys to things that you may have not come across that's important. Right. So this idea of maxima, is basically comes along that it can only happen in a competitive state, just like that lady pulling the car off the baby. It has to be something that is in this heightened kind of flow state, right, that you're going into. And we'll cover some of this and talk about it more. But the point of it is that it's really what people are training for. They're training for that moment when the maxima of maxima is going to occur. Am I resilient and functionally capable enough to handle that moment, right? The highest level performance, that's what we're thinking about, if that makes sense, right? And the other point of it is that it can't be reproduced in training because it's called training. It's something that can only be reproduced in a really competitive situation. Does that make sense? Cool. All right. So then, I have some more information on this too. It's like, well, if a black belt is the master of something, then what does a black belt in PT look like? What does a black belt in the personal training or functional training or sports performance training look like? We should be on some type of trajectory to head towards that mastery, right? Why wouldn't we? We're a doctor in this profession. We should want to have our black belts, I would think. So I just like to relate things a lot to that as well. That's why it's there. Because one of the biases that you have to be careful with, especially in this social media world right now, it's interesting. You guys know who the prehab guys are? Those dudes are like 2 years out of school. They started their whole platform when they were in school, like you guys. And I just remember, watching and seeing them grow and looking at their information, and so many times being like, oh, wow, these guys have no experience. You know what I mean? And you can tell by the information they were putting out that, and me feeling like I'm a black belt, I'm looking at it and going, oh, man, I can't listen to a white belt and just take that information and absorb it like it's the gospel. I have to be able to recognize that these guys are white belts talking about this subject matter. So that's why I point that out to you guys. You got to be careful with that about where you're getting your information. So I know you guys know that, but it's just another way to think about it, right? At the same time, the black belt can learn a ton from the white belt. So don't think I'm trying to say that at all. That's where you get most of your learning, in my opinion, is working with the people and helping them raise their level. So, but when it comes to trying to, look at this information, it can be tough sometimes because people are really good at making videos and having a good social media following these days. So, and coming back to, I think maybe more what Alex was saying, or David, I'm not sure who said it, but this pattern recognition and versus using an exhaustive method, right? So when you're a white belt, especially when it comes to diagnostics and trying to determine a plan of care, we'll stick straight to PT. You have to use typically an exhaustive method of inquiry of what you're trying to do, which is usually this big long form, breaking things down into their smaller components and basically looking at all of these things and all of these aspects and all of these variables before you can start coming to some conclusion and moving forward. Well, as you become, more of a master clinician and as you become more of a black belt, you start to use pattern recognition where you can see somebody walking in from the clinic. You already know, okay, the way that they're walking, they're going to have limited dorsiflexion and probably some pronation in that ankle. You can see that their back is hyperextended. Whatever the pattern is as they're walking in, it's a lot easier for you to pick it up. One of the biggest things, and I'll encourage you guys to pay attention to this as you're looking into your clinicals and things that you're doing, is just watch people's arm swing. It's one of the fastest places that you can see their movement impairments is an uneven arm swing. So a lot of the other things are harder to see, but if you pay attention to the arm swing, you can start breaking things down a lot faster. I think you can see it a lot faster. All right. So again, why is the FyzioGym? Why is this path that I've taken so important? You have the athletic freak and the fitness freak, and more than anything today, we have people that are masochistic and sadists, right? It's funny, as I put this slide together a little while ago, I was reading this. I used to be a little bit of a sadist when it came to a PT because I'm a wrestler, right? I kind of like to see people struggle. I still am like that. I like to see people struggle and go through a difficult, challenging process, and then kind of like the phoenix rise from the ashes type of thing, right? It's a beautiful story. But I've seen some PTs that are a little crazy on this, and even some chiropractors that are worse, where they really think that the more pain that they put their clients in, that they're doing them a favor. Well, I think we can all agree that that's not something we want to do, especially for performance enhancement. There's some argument that there's a spectrum of pain that people need to go through when it's coming to the rehab process. But when you really look at athleticism, it's like as soon as you're in pain, your athleticism is going to decline immediately, right? Your functional capability and resiliency is going to go down. So we don't want to exacerbate that, right? And the same thing with the masochists out there, people that love to put themselves in pain, right? We're going to see them in PT, and that's again this CrossFit phenomenon and overtraining to the point of ridiculousness is become a mainstream thing that we're seeing now. Which when I was going in PT school, like you guys, it was kind of like we were blindsided by this. The idea that people would want to train like a college wrestler, it's like, what? Nobody wanted to work out like that back then. They would look at you like you're absolutely out of your mind, especially, looking at the way the state of the fitness world is now, where, most of the people that work out are doing it and just punishing themselves repetitively over time, right? And then you have this issue with vanity and narcissism, right? And the reason I put this is because, if we're talking about athleticism and functional. Yes, sir. Mike, what's up, man? Question? Or are you just throwing up gang signs?
For me?
Yeah, I wasn't sure what you were doing there.
No,
Are
I'm
you
good.
readjusting something on your screen? Oh, okay. Cool. So I just wasn't sure. So, vanity is my favorite sin. I always joke around about that. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Devil's Advocate with Keanu Reeves and Al Pacino. Vanity drives our attention away from function and practical matters, right? So, if you look at fitness and performance, I mean, at the end of the day, what's more vain than wanting to be the best version of yourself? I mean, there's not much more than that. But it also doesn't mean that you can't do it in a humble process either. But when people are putting vanity ahead of function, that's usually where you see one of your biggest syntax errors, right? So, and again, I'm bringing this up for you guys as things that you can think about as you're continuing to learn how to think about these things and where the bias and flawed thinking is. these are some of the areas where they come from. And I would, also add the PED phenomenon, right? Most of the research that came through the 80s and 90s on this type of stuff was done on people that were on PEDs, right? So you have to understand that doesn't relate to the average person. So we have to be able to extrapolate those things out and think about them on two different sides of the coin. John Wooden, you guys know who he is? Anybody? One of my favorites ever. Check out the Pyramid of Success. Is one of the best books I've ever read. Anybody want to give me the definition of success then? So basically, his definition of success was pretty simple. It was giving your best effort to be the best version of yourself, basically, or to give your best effort at giving your best effort. There's nothing more than you can do, right, than doing that. So that your ultimate success really comes in the process. We'll continue to touch on that as well, right? Just constantly showing up and giving your best effort. There is nothing more than you can do than that, right? So if you guys want to feel successful, right, that's the starting point. If you're not doing that, then you're not being as successful as you can possibly be with anything, and you've got room for improvement, and that's okay as well. But that's the first step, right? And we'll talk about this. I call it the 10 out of 10 principle, right? Is being able to show up and stay focused through a meeting like this or a training session or whatever it is that you're doing, so you can get the most benefit out of it. And this is really where most people struggle. They're getting 50% or maybe less out of the efforts that they're actually putting in, and some of it's just a skill that you have to build on. So, and these are from the book and things that I really love, primarily confidence and self-efficacy, which I'm going to dive into a little bit more here as we go. Any questions on that stuff? Pretty basic. Good. All right. So, question. So, if you guys had to pick one of these bullet points, as your key competitive advantage here, which one would you pick? I'll start with David.
I think it depends on the sport you're playing. I like coordination here.
It depends. You like Andy Galpin? Do you know who he is?
Okay, can you say that name again?
Andy Galpin, Galpin. He's a big biomechanic, muscle physiology guy. That's all his answer. He always says it depends, right? So if you had to pick, though, you'd pick coordination. Okay, how about you, Alex?
I would probably pick economy. Just
economy. How about you? Go ahead. Why?
Important.
Yeah, I agree. What about you, Mike?
I'm going to go movement and economy as well.
Movement economy. Yeah. Noah?
I'm going movement economy as well.
Oh, David. Looks like David might be losing here.
I think people saw your Players Tribune article, and they saw the economic steps, and they're jumping on the bandwagon.
They cheated, huh? Yeah. And Sean, what do you think? No, and Sean, what do you guys think?
I'm going to have to side with David on this. I think coordination would be my competitive advantage pick on that list.
Yeah. Noah?
The movement economy.
Yeah, and this obviously isn't a test, right? So really it's just to make you think more than anything. And, technically they are all kind of intertwined into one thing when you really look at it. And I'll discuss this more probably in a couple of weeks of breaking this down. But, it's really hard to be coordinated if you don't have balance, right? And you really can't have good movement economy if you're not coordinated. So they all really go hand in hand. When it comes to, in terms of a competitive advantage situation, right? Movement economy is going to be the main thing that you're looking at because coordination and balance are a part of those, right? Typically, though, when we're encountering somebody, movement economy is the goal, but on the day-to-day basis of what we're going to be doing is improving their coordination, right? And really, with David, with what you're saying, coordination is probably king. It's probably the most important thing, especially when it comes to athleticism. But ultimately, as you improve coordination, you're ultimately going to improve movement economy. So movement economy ends up being your true king when it comes down to it, right? And when you put two athletes together, their movement economy is partially from training as well, right? So, Sean, you can be very coordinated but have poor what we would call sprint repeatability or power endurance. right? So that becomes that the movement economy piece is this ability to do that coordinated movement with precision and power repetitively over a certain period of time, right? Could be cyclical, could be an acyclical movement, but the ability to do that over time and be efficient with it is what's going to allow you to have the advantage in a competition. Does that make sense? Good, good. All right, so a little bit of, don't want to sit here and talk the whole time, so and try to give you guys some things to think about here, but we're almost at, did we start at 5:30?
5:45 your time, yeah.
5:45, okay, yeah, we're getting close to the end here. So basically movement awareness. So I always like to throw some of these hacks out here to think about. So one of the things I want you to do, just simply, I want you to sit up straight, reach your hands up over your head, and I want you to reach your arms up to the ceiling as high as you possibly can. Really, really, really stretch those fingertips out, right? Now, as you're continuing to reach to the ceiling, all I want you to do is think about where is your head relative to your trunk? Where is your head and trunk relative to your pelvis? Where's the pressure underneath of your feet? Where's the pressure underneath of your pelvis? Keep reaching those arms up, David. No cheating. Right? Keep reaching, right? Now, I want you to think about that position, and I just want you to put your arms down and don't move anything else. Right? This is a real simple hack and trick to find your perfect postural alignment. You can do this when you're standing or sitting. Maybe something you guys have seen before, maybe not. Right? This is one of the biggest hacks that I give most of my spine patients as well. Right? And then we do a bunch of different things with some overhead things like that that are designed to do the same thing in single leg positions and different lunging positions and whatnot. You guys ever see that before? I know Noah probably has. We used to, you don't remember that? Yeah. Right?
Not really. I'm not gonna lie, I do not.
That's all right. It's been a long time. Yeah. It's one of the things we usually typically have people do that whenever they're, like for an office worker that has some type of shoulder or neck pain. Hey, do a couple shoulder scap squeezes, do this overhead correction, do the scap squeezes again as a home exercise program, repetitive postural training type of thing, right? But, again, we're going to get into this more, but, your positioning is going to matter whenever you're going to create any type of movement, especially with precision. My balance or my postural alignment is going to dictate that base where I'm going to then move my limbs, right, in some type of coordinated manner and hopefully have good movement economy when we're doing that, or, especially training for improved movement economy. So another thing is looking at, and I don't know if you guys are doing this right now. I can see Noah is, and let's see, Sean, no. Everybody looks good now. I should have brought this up before I had you guys do the overhead correction, but is, that second bullet point there is weight bearing on your upper extremities, right? So this is another little trick, and I'd love to hear what you guys think about this today, and even as we move on with this, coming back to next week, when we talk about this more. But everybody is also trying to link posture, right, to all of these injury issues and, pathomechanics and the pathologies that we see in the musculoskeletal system, orthopedics, whatever you want to call it. And basically, I've come to believe this, and, this is probably more of an anecdotal thing from me than you're going to see it in the literature. I haven't seen anything on this, but I believe what causes most of people's postural issues is weight bearing on their upper extremities in positions where they're not designed to weight bear in the upper extremities. So my big philosophy is that basically everything movement related comes down to a couple of phases, right? There's another book that I would encourage you guys to look at called Triphasic Training. And I think of it more than this. I think there's 4 or 5 phases. I keep it simple right now. You have force creation, force absorption, and then you have the amortization phase, which is the changeover between the concentric and the eccentric, right? So the concentric is the force creation, the eccentric is the force absorption, and then you have that isometric amortization phase, like within a plyometric, that we want to shorten that time down as quickly as possible to restore all the muscle spindles and Golgi tendon organs back to their normal functional state, so you're not creating overload to the tendons and all those things that we can get into. So that anytime that we're in a position that we're talking about movement characteristics, there is an ideal position that is going to allow you to create force and absorb force, and as well as do it rapidly during that amortization phase. which comes back to that AV post that I was talking about. We were talking about how does somebody do the 1-inch punch or change direction when they're running full speed, right? It's pretty crazy to think that, you know, the elite athletes are doing that, but that's exactly what it is. So if I'm weight bearing or my base of support or whatever we want to talk about along those lines is in a certain position and my body alignment is not in the correct position for optimal mechanics, then I'm not going to be able to have optimal mechanics, which is going to lead to all of the things that, you know, pathomechanics lead to, tissue overload and all of these other things. Again, I'm trying to stay tight and concise on these things. We can get more in depth on pathomechanics and whatnot as we go along, and how that you know, sequelae and cascade of things happens to the connective tissue and whatnot. And I really am a big fan of understanding the myofascial system, not from a, you know, massaging and rolfing passive scenario, but, you know, if the connective tissue in the myofascia has a role in pathomechanics and injuries, then it must have a role in elite mechanics as well. And so the question is you know, ultimately is how, right? Which, you know, alluding to those you know, questions about the differences between elite athletes and the rest of us, you know, their reflex mechanisms are at a way higher level than ours. And I believe that a lot of it comes through how their myofascial system has been trained. So again, weight bearing on those upper extremities is going to cause you to be in this loading scenario when you should be in this stabilizing or force absorbing situation, and you're ultimately putting the body in an inappropriate mechanical alignment. What do you guys think about that?
I feel like that makes sense, and it's funny because you saying that clarifies just like a lot of stuff I've personally been seeing in the clinic with injuries, but I would have never just like thought about that. But the way you said that makes that very clear, and I think that's totally correct.
So when you talk about weight bearing activities on the upper extremity, for your normal person who's not necessarily an elite athlete, what are those weight bearing activities that seem to be the issue?
Oh, sure. Yeah. And I'm just talking about the basics, right? Sitting at your desk right here, right? We're not designed to be in this position, resting our weight on our elbows with our head in this position, in this kyphotic thing, right? So it's like, well, I could sit here and be in a kyphotic position and not necessarily really have too big of a problem. It's not the kyphosis, in my opinion, that really changes things, especially if I have the mobility to go in and out of that position. But as soon as I weight bear onto my elbows, now all of those things that help to keep my posture in the correct alignment, right, turn off basically. So now I start working on using all these compensatory strategies, you know, and at the end of the day, it's also a side to side thing. We can talk about that, you know, and we will talk about that as we go along here. But a lot of people rest their arm on one elbow, right? Especially when they're driving. You see that as well. And it's like, well, don't you think that that's going to have some effect over time, right? Mechanically with the body, right? And also reflexively of what's going on. And one of the reasons I see this the most, because I work with a lot of recreational athletes. We'll just, you know, I'll use jujitsu as an example. Most of those dudes, they sit at a desk all day doing some type of engineering or accounting job, and then they run to their car, they sit in their car for a half hour, they hop out of their car, and they hop right into a jujitsu class, right? They've spent their whole day in this kyphotic position, and they barely do anything to warm up, and boom, now they have somebody tugging on their neck and pulling their arms and doing all of this stuff. And it's like your body has literally been sitting there and remodeling itself in this negative, you know, kyphotic position all day, and you're not doing anything to change that. And it was what really made me start thinking about it years back, you know, of, you know, what's really going on with these postures. And again, you as we go along, right, if athleticism is the thing that matters the most, right, there's even a way to look at things. I know it's a little bit skewed to think about it, but there's a better athletic version of sitting in a chair and a less athletic version of sitting in a chair. If you want to put it on a spectrum like that, it's like, well, what do I mean from that? It's like, or are you in a position where you can move? Are you in a position where you're stuck to the ground or stuck to the table or stuck to the chair, or could you move, right, without making some type of counter movement? I guess that would be the point of it, right? So, and that comes back to that 1-inch punch and the cutting mechanics, and what, you know, you see in a really high level athletics, right, is this ability to move without a counter motion preceding it. Does that make sense? So if I'm in a really good postural position, I should be able to move pretty mechanically efficiently. But if I'm out of that alignment and my base of support, my center of gravity is outside of my base of support, the lever arms are going to start getting too long. So then I have to basically do some type of preparatory movement to get my center of mass back over top of the base of stability in a position where I can create efficient movement. Does that make sense? Right. So, and that's really the goal of every functional movement that we do, is to basically align our center of mass, have our limbs in the correct position, so then we can move our body and our limbs in this coordinated manner for better movement economy. Does that make sense? Right. So now, if you look at every injury that you're going to see, I said this in this group that I was talking with this morning, and I really had a thought about this yesterday, but it was something that I thought about and I learned about years ago. And it's primarily that your ACL is not going to tear unless you put it into the position where it can tear. Does that make sense? Because otherwise your PCL is going to tear, or your patellar tendon is going to tear, or your MCL is going to tear, or if the injury is bad enough, you might see more than one ligament that tears, right? Especially with contact injuries like car accidents and, for example, an NFL lineman falling on another lineman's knee, you're going to have more than one injury. But that injury has to be real specific in terms of its positioning for that injury to actually occur, especially when we're talking about non-contact injuries. And so that ACL has to get into this inappropriate alignment, or the ACL has to become really taught or experience this extra shear force or whatever type of force that you want to talk about in this specific position for that injury to happen. Does that make sense when I say that? And the reason why I'm saying that is because those positions are exactly the opposite of what I'm talking about this. My center of mass is in the right position relative to my base of support, right? And my limb positions are in the angles where I can move with the most efficiency. Every single injury, especially non-contact injuries, can be related back to that, right? The more that I can stay in that, which I'll get to this later, we call it the power position. The more that I can be close to the power position, the more likelihood of the ratios go down that I'm at risk for injury. Does that make sense? So this is where this full spectrum comes into play, where we need to understand the lower level function and the higher level function, because I always joke about this, but we need to have a better sense of human, right? And that this is the full spectrum. We should understand cradle to the grave. We should understand neurological dysfunction to the highest levels of functional performance possible, as much as we can, right? That, to me, that should be the exploration if you want to get a better understanding of this stuff in totality. But it's pretty simple the way that I'm explaining it, right? This isn't rocket science. There's an optimal movement pattern and there's a really dysfunctional movement pattern, and then people are going to fall somewhere in between, and that's where this evaluation-based protocol that I'm going to get into here later comes into, because it really becomes, if we're a doctor, it's our evaluation skills that make the difference in how we understand this stuff, right? So, and hopefully, I won't spend too much time on this, but another reason why I really pushed to start the FyzioGym was because we can't get access to the best of the best, right? If you guys are going through this training program, if one of your family members called you right now and said, "Hey, I just tore my ACL," where would you send them, right? You're probably going to send them to some place that's better than that they would choose for themselves, right? They don't typically get and have the best decision making when it comes to trying to find the right doctor. Actually, last year there was a study that came out that showed that 9 out of 10 ACL surgeries were done by a doctor that does less than 10 per year. Crazy, right? Now you think about skewed and biased data, right? And it's like, well, what's the percentage of that? The 10% of those that went to the right surgeon, what's their injury rates, and what's the injury rates of the 90% of the rest of the people that went to these surgeons that don't know what they're doing, arguably, right? Or have less experience, we'll just say that. So we don't always have access to the best, products out there when it comes to physical therapy, and typically the market leaders, wherever you're from, are going to dictate where you're going to go. They don't typically request the best products, and usually the insurance is driving what's going on as well, right? Which is a big challenge for us to navigate if we really have the altruism that we're supposed to have in the best interest of our clients in mind, right? Well, why doesn't everybody get equal access? And ultimately, this leads to the healthcare patient, right? Whether it's physical therapy or it's, physician services, whatever you want to talk about, not being the best consumer of healthcare. And that's we're dealing with a very, uninformed audience typically, which I know you guys know that most of the clients that we see, half the time don't know the difference between their quad and their hamstring, right? But yet we're supposed to explain pain science and all this crazy stuff to them, right? Stick to the basics, that's how you're going to keep their attention.
Your sound went off.
Lineal.
Join the meeting.
So it's cool because you guys were already asking about some of these things that I was talking about, or that I wanted to talk about. So regional interdependence, you guys know that term? They still use that term much, right? So that term wasn't coined until the 2000s. Right? It's kind of crazy to think about, right? This isn't that long ago, but before that, we didn't really have a term for, the knee bones connected to the hip bone, this type of idea. So it just wasn't there. So again, I come back to that. Most of your physical therapists, that are, probably older than me, were trained in learning, hey, I'm going to specialize and be the shoulder guy for this shoulder orthopedic. And, even podiatry is another way to look at that, right? They don't look at anything above the knee. So they have this kind of biased perspective on understanding movement. And coming back to what Alex said, it's like, well, no kidding, this would be a really hard paradigm to switch to, where, the history of this profession and the science behind it was all in this kind of reductionist thinking, right? Instead of looking at this more macroscopic idea. So, right, our goal should always be to get people back to 100% or better, right? Most of the time, that's not what's happening in therapy, especially because the insurance will stop reimbursing for all of these things, without, once somebody's at, 85, 90%, it's hard for us to justify that, they belong in skilled therapy. But it's like, we should still be helping these people. They still have deficits, and we know that, and there's still other ways to help them. So, and another big issue is with adolescent athletes, right? Who's the practitioner of choice for an adolescent athlete? And one of the reasons I bring this up is because 75% of athletes quit before they're in 9th grade, right? So it's like, is that too loud? Can you guys hear me okay? What's up, Diego? So when we're looking at athletics, we also have to go back and look at children and adolescents, because they're the biggest category of athletes that we're actually seeing. Most of the time, we're all dreaming about working with these professional athletes, when the majority of injuries we're seeing are typically in teenagers, and especially prepubescent teens now, with all the apophysitis issues, Osgood-Schlatters and Sever's disease and all those problems, right? So the point of this is, because of all of these things, we need a different place and setting to be able to work with these populations, right? People that are active and proactive, people that want to get back to 100% or better, we need to have a place where we can, facilitate that process and give them the best choice possible.
Can I ask a quick question about the
Sure, brother.
100%? So I actually had this conversation with my clinical instructor the other day about insurance and reimbursement and trying to get athletes back to their prior level of function. So I was wondering, in your experiences, have you seen difficulty with asking for more visits with these patients, because technically their 100% would be their prior level of function, which is them being an athlete, but like, again, there's also like Medicare or Medicaid who only cares about getting you to doing ADLs, but I wouldn't imagine these athletes come in with that insurance.
Yeah, for me, it's always come down to using an evaluation-based protocol, right? So you can justify and document what you're doing, right? So it's like the 85% thing is a part of the clinical prediction rules, right? When you're looking at returning somebody back to function or back to sport. So the subjective rating, and also with your outcome questionnaires, right? That's only a piece of it. But if you can objectively measure, where somebody still has a deficit below 85% or some type of symmetry index, usually that's where you're at. I'm looking at, hey, is the right arm different than the left arm, left leg, right leg type of thing, right? Whatever task that you're looking at, you're also looking at that with functional activities as well, where, in a thrower, though, you can't really compare them to their non-dominant side, right? Which is another hindrance, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's a challenge. I also think that it's different state to state. Like, I'm finding that it's way more lenient here in California than it was in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania really pushed to cut off the insurance payments a lot faster than they are out here for things. At least that's been my initial, 18-month experience or whatever, wherever I'm at here, going on, actually 2 years now. So I think that dictates, what's going on. And again, coming back to that evaluation-based protocol and how you're assessing and how you're portraying the true functional capacity of that person, right? Does that make sense? Good.
Yeah.
So again, coming back to the why, right? Exercise is medicine. Well, if it is, who's supposed to be the one prescribing it? I've been saying that for a long time, right? I also don't believe exercise is medicine. I believe exercise is hygiene. It's not something that you take and work on, that it's going to change some disease state, right? Most of the time, actually, if you exercise when you're in a disease state to a certain point, where we would consider it fitness exercising, you're actually going to have a detrimental effect. You guys are going to go, well, of course, exercise is going to help somebody that has a disease state, but not necessarily if it's not prescribed correctly, right? So a practitioner that has that unique body of knowledge, such as a doctor of physical therapy, should be somebody that's prescribing, an exercise regimen for somebody that has disease of any type, in my opinion, or any deficit, in my opinion, and possibly anybody that's healthy or an elite performer should also have some type of prescription from a physical therapist. But that also starts with us having the ability to assess these people. That comes back to Sean. It's like, well, should we only assess people when they're hurt? Type of thing, right? Oh, that's what I wanted to say about the prehab guys too. You guys know the term prehab doesn't mean injury prevention. You guys familiar with that or no? I don't know if they talk about it or not, right? So prehab was becoming a thing when I was coming, into the profession, where it was, hey, we know that if somebody is going to have surgery in a month from now, right, and we get them better and stronger and healthier before the surgery, that their outcomes are going to be better after the surgery. That's what prehab is. It's not prevention. People bastardize that term all the time. So, at the same time, culture changes the way we use terms. Sometimes that's the way that it goes, and that may be, what's going on. But when it comes down to, a technical aspect, that, people are really using that term incorrectly. So next, right, coming back to improper year-round training, leading to long-term damage. We're in this era now where people are actually exercising year-round. When I was a kid, it didn't really exist. People just didn't do this. And now everybody's so, into exercise medicine and the athletic freak, fitness freak thing that, people are doing this to themselves with very improper guidance, and maybe no guidance at all. I'm working with a lady right now that I'd love to tell more about it, but we're running out of time. But she just literally abuses the shit out of herself. It's just ridiculous. She almost does the same workout like every day, 6 days a week, and she's always in pain and won't change what she's doing. And she's getting better right now because she actually is having some more problems, more than just achy pain type of stuff. She's starting to have some sciatic issues, so now she's starting to pay attention. And also looking at periodization, conjugate versus linear. It's something I encourage you guys to really look into and trying to understand the different types of periodization. It's one of the things that can really change how you look at your exercise programming, and ultimately how you're doing everything for your plan of care, starting with the end in mind, and understanding the process that needs to unfold for them to adapt and get the best out of everything that you're doing. And then ultimately, we want to be able to provide the safest but most effective methods for training. That should be, I think, where we're moving to in the future, right? We should be looking at trying to provide this safe and effective thing to keep people as healthy and well as possible. Here's some more things on the why, right? Trying to provide training programs for the whole team. Adolescent athletes, we're only as strong as the weakest link. Some people can't afford it. We still need to be able to have options for them. And ultimately, training for these teams helps to build the culture around it. People with orthopedic issues should have an option for exercise. I talked about this. My dad had a real bad motorcycle accident when he was in his late 20s. He's had problems his whole life. About 10 years ago, he went to his doctor and was like, ready to try to do something, was motivated to start losing weight and whatnot, and his doctor was like, hey, how's it going? Your blood work looks pretty good. He's like, what have you been doing? He's like, well, I've been, doing the elliptical a little bit and doing some stretches. Okay, keep doing that. My dad's like, what's that? What I need some better information here. What am I supposed to do with my life? I've had these back surgeries. I need my knee replaced. I need something more specific. And obviously I was going through this PT, program at the time. And, and he's, actually I would have been out of my profession at the time whenever this was going on, or I would have been out of school at this time. And he was getting more familiar with what I did. And so he was more educated. So he was trying to get his physician to give him some answers. And the guy just didn't have any, right? And this is probably one of the things that, we don't always think about, that most of the people that we encounter are very apprehensive, and they don't always believe that physical therapy is going to be something that's going to help them. Sometimes they're afraid it's going to make them worse. Sometimes they're afraid, just in general, they're intimidated by the whole process because they don't understand it. I mean, think about, where you guys are at right now and how you still don't understand everything, right? So you're still putting the pieces together on all of this. They got to have some empathy for your clients and patients they don't really understand what they're supposed to expect, right? And that's our job as a doctor to help guide them through that process, right? And ultimately, most people don't really believe in therapeutic exercise. If you've never done it before, where you've, done exercise and made yourself better, especially coming back from an injury or some pain syndrome that you're having, it's really something that's hard to believe in. And it might be their first situation. I typically have the opposite for me, which is kind of cool. I get people that have already been to 3 other physical therapists before, and now they're seeing me, and they don't really believe in physical therapy as much as that I want them to, but they've already had some level of experience with it. So it allows me to get a little bit more relatable with them, typically, especially when you're working with athletes. Unfortunately, those guys have had, many surgeries. All right, so I'll finish with this. So how many of you guys have had an injury and had physical therapy yourself before? Nobody? Just David? Sean? Sean, no. Noah, no. Mike, no. When I had never had physical therapy myself before either, which was pretty interesting because I had a lot of injuries, but back then we just didn't do anything about it. And I can get more into that with my own experience, but this is one of the questions usually when I'm talking to groups, and I ask and I say, how many of you were 100% after you got done with your physical therapy? And almost everybody says no, right? They were not 100% after they got done with their injury or their PT plan of care. And it always really surprises me, that we don't always do the best job that we think that we're doing, and we leave people short. But again, this comes back to a lot of people don't expect to be 100% after they get done with physical therapy. So it's something to think about. Right, this is 90% is not an A. This is something that my mentor during my residency used to say to me all the time. And basically, we were working with all these high-level athletes at the University of Cincinnati, and he would say, "Hey, Junior." He always called me juniors, what he called people in this, demeaning way, right? Which I was, as an athlete, it never bothered me. But 90% is not an A around here. We do things 100% of the time, 100% correctly, right? And it was a big deal. And I think to kind of finalize the environment or the scenario that was going on whenever I was coming into my residency in 2006, the thing that I try to leave everybody with understanding is that non-contact injuries are almost entirely preventable, right? As we keep going into this more, right? There's no reason that a non-contact injury there are reasons, right? There's excuses and there's circumstances and there's etiologies and all of these other things, but they're still primarily preventable. When we look at the full scope of everything, there's things that could have been done to prevent almost every non-contact injury, or it's probably more likely that it was actually a contact injury. So in 2006, the New York Yankees fired their strength and conditioning and sports medicine staff, everybody, because they had 5 or 6 guys pull their hamstring the first week of spring training. So this is right as I entered in, I started my residency at the end of May. So right after spring training, and baseball had just gotten started. And this was like the big deal at the time, for sports medicine and, physical therapy and ultimately strength and conditioning, that, you can't be bringing athletes into the in season, at risk for injury. You got to be kidding me, right? So we had this like very heightened state that was going on at the University of Cincinnati as I was walking into my residency, and it kind of set the tone for the rest of the time that I was there, right? So I'll end there right now. So what if you guys want to talk about anything or ask any questions, or we can just, wrap things up here.
I have no question, but thank you very much. This is really informative.
Yeah, how'd you guys like the information so far? It's really only going to get better. A lot of this stuff's kind of anecdotal and jumping around a little bit and kind of trying to set the tone of where I'm coming from. But we're going to get more specific as we go.
I really liked that we got to talk about a lot of different topics moving throughout like these different slides and building how they connect and intertwine to one another, and then giving like the real life examples that relate to you and your experiences, and then even moving forward with the research.
Right, yeah, exactly. And I want to try to do my best to do that for you guys. I think one of my big strengths is the real world experience and trying to tie it back into the science and the research, like you just said. So, and that's what I'm trying to do. And also at the same time, kind of paint the picture of like, where did we come from? I think it's an important thing to understand some of this stuff and to think about things, to put it in perspective, because it's like, how do you really know where you're going if you don't know where you came from? Anything else?
This was just this was really awesome. Thanks once again, Lenio. I feel like you at least for me, you taught me some stuff in 1 hour than some of our professors were able to teach in a whole semester. So thank you very much.
Yeah. And again, that's that push to becoming the black belt master type of scenario, right? It's like, I don't know. And I encourage you guys to be this way. Like I was absolutely, and I'm still like this. If I have a question to an answer and I can't find the answer, it drives me crazy. Right. So, and I won't take the first answer, that I get. I always want to have this kind of comprehensive view on it. And then it's like, well, it also should apply across the board. If we're going to think about principles, right? Principles should have a very widespread application. They should work for people that, are at the principle of initial gains and also at the principle of diminishing returns. Those are 2 big principles that, we need to understand across the spectrum, of anything that we're doing. So, if we have a training system that only works for 25-year-old college athletes, it's like, well, is it really working? How is that 25-year-old college athlete a different type of human than a 15-year-old athlete or a 35-year-old person or a 55-year-old person? The principles governing all of this should be the same. Then, as we talk about specialization, then we can start changing things. But the fabric, and the infrastructure behind our beliefs and ultimately the systems and strategies that we want to execute on, those principles should be sound in science and also in real world experience there, Sean. So that's a great point. Good. Because that's what I'm trying to do. Is there any, how about that? I'd like to, before we go, I guess you guys got a few minutes to tell me about pain science.
We've gotten a little bit of